Hello, everyone. I'm Jussi Palomäki. I'm currently a part-time university lecturer and a researcher in cognitive science here at the University of Helsinki. I've been around for quite some time. Started studying cognitive science in 2004. Finished my master's here in 2010, and then did a PhD, which I finished in 2013. So I've been hanging around for quite some time. Just to briefly describe my journey or my experience in cognitive science, I wanted to emphasize kind of the multidisciplinary or the interdisciplinary nature of the science itself, as well as my journey in it. So I began with sort of being interested in the philosophy of mind or consciousness, and sort of how we can explain these mysterious phenomena such as feeling, and what it is like to be a bat and so forth. So I did my bachelor's thesis on the topic of philosophy of mind. From there, I moved on to studying neuromarketing, which is basically just studying the brain's responses to marketing stimuli. Did my master's on that. My PhD, in turn, was related to poker, decision-making, emotions, and expertise. Well, not expertise, but emotions, and the so-called tilting phenomenon. After which I went to Newcastle in the UK to study the psychology of deception, followed by another stint of postdoc on the moral psychology of robotics. So that's a lot of different things. But they all do share in common the fact that they all deal with information processing, which is at the core of cognitive science. Today, however, I will be focusing more on my research on poker and emotions and expertise, mainly because it's the one topic that I care the most about, and it's sort of very close to my heart. And it's also sort of, it's very personal. So I would like to begin with a story, like a very personal story that's related to my so-called poker career. I used to play poker since I still sort of very rarely play it, but I used to play it very actively online since 2006 until maybe 2012 or so. This is a description of my experience, from my poker career experience, like a word cloud of the things that happened. I remember being an inexperienced player and having these moments of frustration, having these very sort of emotional experiences, sudden bursts of anger at various events. Losing money felt really bad, and I was sort of, the word used here is tilting. So I tilted a lot. So tilting means losing control due to negative emotions and making very bad decisions, and therefore losing even more money than otherwise. The worst experience I had was something along the lines of losing maybe 1,500 euros during a 20-minute session, which was a lot for a student. I mean, in the long run, I was able to make enough money to pay the rent, but still losing more than the previous 4 months' sort of work felt pretty bad. So I was just playing for 20 minutes, basically lost all consciousness, just just making decisions in a monkey rage. And at some point, I was just, I pulled up a pillow, and I just wailed into that pillow very hard for maybe 15 seconds, ended up with a really bad headache that lasted for maybe 6 hours or something. I figured that I might have maybe given myself a stroke or something. And at that point, I wanted to reevaluate what was happening. So I felt that I'm a smart person. I shouldn't probably be yelling into pillows and giving myself strokes. But then again, tilting is and was a very common phenomenon, very common thing that happened to everybody. Everybody who played poker for a bit, for any sort of like a longer period of time, they had experiences of tilting. And as far as experiences of tilt go, me yelling into a pillow and having a terrible headache was very benign. There were people basically pulling out knives and hitting themselves in the leg to avoid the pain, the mental frustration, the mental disarray of being tilted. So it was a thing. It was happening. Many people were experiencing it. So even if you were a very mathematically apt and an avid poker player who knew the game, who knew the strategy, if you couldn't control your emotions, if you let sort of on the spur of the moment lost control, you might end up losing your entire bankroll within minutes. And this might be a bankroll that you spend multiple years building. Other examples were people who had let's say 300,000 to 400,000 euros in their bank account, a similar amount in their poker account that they had been playing for 5 years. One 20-minute tilt session, they basically lost everything and then just went to take a shower. And in the Finnish words of one anecdote, they said that they performed the koko vartalo tyhjennys, which is basically just like emptying your body from all fluids and just crying in the shower. Anyway, so this is a phenomenon that happened. And despite being quite ubiquitous in the poker community, despite everybody knowing what was happening, everybody knowing that it was happening, there was very little research on this topic. So instead of continuing to be a tilt monkey, I decided that I probably should start maybe studying it instead of playing the game myself. So that was sort of the beginning of, well, there are other things involved, but that was one of the instigators of why I became interested in emotions and the effect of emotions on decision making. So what's happening when people tilt? There's a very good example among monkeys. We should always look at monkeys when we want to understand behavior of humans. But in any case, this is an experiment performed, conducted in the early 2000 something. The current reference in this slide is actually from a review paper. But they had capuchin monkeys, which are depicted in this figure. They had two monkeys in separate cages that were next to each other. And the monkeys had a task. The experimenters gave the monkeys pebbles, so tiny little rocks. And the monkeys were to give the pebble back to the experimenter, upon which they would receive a reward. And the reward could either be a low-level reward, which is a piece of a cucumber, or a high-level reward, such as a grape, which is sweeter. It's a much better reward than a piece of cucumber. So, in the beginning, when they gave the monkeys the pebble and the monkey did the work, like, I'm doing as I'm supposed to be doing, I'm giving you this rock, please give me a reward. And they gave a reward, and it was a cucumber, and that was fine with the monkeys. They were very happy with the reward. However, if it happened that the experimenters actually first gave the left side monkey, they did the work, they gave the pebble back, and they got a cucumber, that was fine. But then after that, they actually gave the other monkey a grape for the same work. So the other monkey did the same work, they got a grape. Then they came back to the first monkey. At this point, he or she was actually expecting to get a grape, right? Because the other monkey now got a better reward. But now if they gave that monkey a cucumber, they were no longer happy with it because they had seen that the other monkey actually got a better reward for the same work. So the way they reacted at that point was actually just morally outragingly throwing the cucumber at the experimenter. So it's like, I don't want any of these shenanigans anymore, so take back your cucumber. I want the same thing that the other guy got. So it's sort of like an expression of unfairness. They realize that this is unfair treatment. It is not the same reward for the same amount of work. It is sort of like a form of moral anger, moral rage, if you will. There should be similar, like a just way there should be justice in these types of situations. So monkeys behave like that. And there's actually a good reason why tilting is often referred to as monkey rage or cosmic injustice. Well, monkey rage is a good example. Monkey rage is the type of tilt that really takes you over the edge. And I have after this example, I'm going to go back to poker. And here are a couple of figures. I'm going to go through what's happening in these figures. But the important thing here is to realize that poker is inherently a game where the same work or the same decisions lead to different outcomes. And by this I mean that the same decision, a good decision, can either lead to a poor to a very good outcome, like a high reward, or a very bad outcome, which is like losing your money. And this is due to variance. And here's, let me see if I can size. Yeah, oh, there's a delay. So yeah, first let's look at the top figure here. So this is just the mathematical expression of variance within a poker game. We can imagine that both these lines here, the top line and the bottom line, are individual players. They're playing the game for, in this particular figure, they've played the game for 200,000 hands. So they've played poker for 200,000 hands. And one hand is being dealt cards, making decisions, and then the hand is over. That's one hand. That times 200,000, and we have this type of a figure. The thing here is that both of these players, the top, sort of the top curve and the bottom curve, are mathematically defined as making identical decisions. They're equally good. Both have the exact same level of skill. And the level of skill is depicted by the dashed line. So they're both players who are expected to make a long-term profit should they keep playing the game for an infinite amount of time. But we see that after 200,000 hands, two equally good players playing, the other player may end up winning 15,000 euros, while the other player may end up losing 5,000 euros. So there's a 20,000 euro difference between two equally good players after both have been playing the game for 200,000 hands. So then the question becomes, well, okay, let's have a brief look at the other figure, which is basically the same figure, except that I've defined, that sort of simulated a scenario where each and every one of those curves, I think there are 25 different curves. Each and every one of those is an individual player, and all of those players are defined as having the same skill. So all of them are expected to lose money over the long run. And here there are 300,000 hands, and we can see that a couple of those players have actually made profit. They have made money playing poker after 300,000 hands, whilst the other end of the players have lost money. The entire point here is that they're making identical decisions, but they're getting unequal pay, unequal reward for their effort. This is the nature of variance in the game, and especially so for specific forms of poker. But the main point is that if you want to sort of understand, if you are a person who expects some amount of fairness in the world, I made a good decision, so I'm expected to get some sort of a reward for it, you shouldn't play poker. Usually we say that poker is not played in the short run. So in the short run, there's a lot of the variance or chance has a higher impact than in the long run. But then the short run is difficult to define. I've defined it here as something that lasts for less than 1 million hands. I've played poker for about 2 million hands myself during my career, so that's 2 million times I've been dealt a card, made decisions, folded or called or bet or whatever, raised. So 2 million of those, mainly online, because it's impossible to play that many hands in a live poker game. But still, after 2 million hands, I think the longest downswing that I had, which is losing money constantly over a specific time period, was like 90,000 hands. So I played 90,000 hands, losing all the time, basically. But that's just the nature of the game. So the way we started, because we were interested in why people tilt. What is tilting? We understand that the nature of the game is such that, you know, it's very conducive to people tilting. The very first study that we performed, and this was the first paper in my PhD thesis, we did this research with Michael Laakaso and Mikko Salmela. It was a qualitative paper. It's not very common in cognitive science to use qualitative methods, and I'm not really used to. I've done this paper on qualitative measures, but that was the first step that we did. We asked poker players to write stories. Just, you know, write your story. Use as many words as you like, but be as elaborate as you can. Describe the situation when you've lost money, lost a significant amount of money playing poker. How did it feel? What caused the event? What did you do afterwards? And so forth. So we wanted to get as many stories as we could, and we qualitatively sort of analyzed their contents. And this here is a model of sorts that we discovered. And it seemed, and this is sort of like the etiology of tilt, what causes tilt and where it leads. We focused on those situations where people had lost money. So the instigator of tilting in this initial study was a significant loss of money. It was usually sometimes followed by these dissociative feelings. I can't believe what just happened. And a good metaphor is if you're really a hockey fan, and Sweden scores against Finland in a final, it feels like somebody punches the air out of your gut. That type of a feeling. I just can't believe that happened. The feeling of disbelief. And then there's moral indignation. There's the feeling of cosmic injustice. This is not the way things are supposed to go. So tilting is like losing when we feel that we shouldn't, and shouldn't is like a normative statement. Because the universe is supposed to be cosmically just, everybody should get their fair share. If that doesn't happen, if I lose in a situation where I'm 90% likely to win, then losing is unfair, cosmically unfair. The players felt that they didn't get what they deserved, after which they started chasing their losses, which means that they started playing more aggressively. They felt that because I lost, even though I shouldn't have normatively, it's unfair, inherently unfair, it must be that continuing to play will eventually rectify this cosmic injustice. In our ancestors, like those who lived in the upper Pleistocene era, 200,000 to 2 million years ago, if you had a caveman whose somebody stole their resources, they would react with anger, and that would be beneficial, because if you didn't react with anger, you wouldn't be able to protect your resources and so forth. So this type of a moral anger makes sense in the context of evolution, but in the context of online poker, it basically just makes you click harder because you're chasing your fair chance, and the only tool you have is a mouse, basically. And it's also interesting if you happen to get the money back by, like, if you get really lucky after a big loss and you win the money back, then that's like an instant fix. You forget that we were tilted in the first place. But it almost never happens. You usually just end up losing everything you have in the bankroll. And this is usually followed by an aftermath of tilt, which is like disappointment in self, or disappointment in losing control, anxiety, and depression. By depression, I mean self-described depression, not a clinically defined one. This is just using the words that the players themselves used. Rumination over lost resources, sleeping problems, and sadness, and so forth. So this is sort of like the etiology, the linear progression of a tilt experience in poker. Turns out that it's not just common, it's not common only to poker. The word tilting, it actually originates from pinball machines when people started shaking the pinball machine, and it no longer allowed them to make any moves, and it sort of tilted. And they're using the same term in other esports titles, StarCraft 2 and Hearthstone and so forth, Dota 2. So tilting is a very common thing these days among in the gaming, at least the esports and gaming world. But I do think it's a more universal phenomenon than this even. I think there's tilting specifically in situations where, as I mentioned before, you lose when you feel you shouldn't. Like, and shouldn't means like there's some inherent cosmic reason why you shouldn't lose. That causes that instant moral rage. So where I'm currently at is that I'm interested in this type of in this type of situation where you need to be, if you want to be an expert, if you want to be a very successful professional expert poker player, you not only need to have that technical knowledge, but you also need to have proficiency in emotion control. You need to have that Zen master-like Sera type mentality towards things that you can't control. You need to realize that the world isn't fair, variance doesn't have a memory, and losing 10 coin flips in a row is absolutely going to happen many times over. And if you've never experienced what it's like to lose 10 coin flips in a row, I recommend having that experience, especially if there's money involved, because it's not fun. How am I for time, by the way? I haven't kept track. Okay, cool. So, currently, another thing we noticed in our research was that there's some distinction between experienced poker players and inexperienced poker players. It seemed that experienced poker players were able to sort of, or at least that they were people who were less emotional to begin with. So being unemotional helps you to gain poker experience. And it's probably exactly related to these incidents where you need to, where there's an instant unfair thing that feels very unfair, and you need to control the urges caused by that specific event. Yeah, I think that I was wondering if I had another slide, but it turns out I didn't. Here's a picture that I took myself. It's a chip and a chair, and that's to end on I wanted to end on a positive note. A chip and a chair refers to the anecdote in poker where if you're in a poker tournament, having a chair means that you're still in the tournament, and having one chip means that you still have something to gamble with. So if you have a chip and a chair, you can still win the whole tournament. And it has happened a couple of times, although it's of course very unlikely. In any case, thank you very much. That was my presentation.